for you. I will find you. And I will kill you.
I am the Walrus. Shut the fuck up, Donnie.
The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.
What we've got here is failure to communicate.
Mrs. Robinson, you're trying to seduce me. Aren't you?
Was it over when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor? Hell no!
Just been revoked.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
You want answers!
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth!
Because it is my name!
I see, Dave.
Today, Junior?
You ever dance with the devil in the pale moonlight? What?
You'll shoot your eye out, kid.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
The price is wrong, bitch.
The devil ever pulled.
Oh, of course, as we notice, as it gets a little janky there with our intro, as soon as I hit a button, for some reason the intro wanted to start replaying. But fun times as always here with the
Technical difficulties
Cynics podcast, and yes, technical difficulties. All right, let's get that out of the way so it doesn't start doing anything else on us.
Was convincing the...
It's playing again. All right, well, that's just fun times. It's a perfect Friday for us when we're recording this.
Technical difficulties podcast.
Yeah, there we go. That's the new name of the podcast, or our second show.
That's our new show.
Like, obviously, my green screen is leaking through a little bit because I've got this new monitor and I can't figure out the right setup for the lighting just yet. So, just wonderful times. It's also been a wonderful week for me here as well. So, it's actually nice to not think about anything work related. But all right, let's just go ahead and get past all the awkward open there. Welcome to the Critics Not Cynics podcast, the podcast that tries to prove that you can be a critic without being a cynic. And as always, I'm joined by Leslie. Leslie, how you doing?
I think we're okay.
That's about all we can hope for at this moment.
It's been a week.
It's been a year. I mean, like this week felt like
you
a
mean
year.
so far?
Well, and that too. But yeah, it's been interesting. Like I said, I've got this new monitor now, so I'm still getting used to that. My camera's now angled, so it's really weird now having to look up at it rather than straight at it.
Oh yeah, for me to look straight into the camera.
Right. So it's all kind of all kinds of crazy. This monitor ended up being bigger than I thought it would be. So, but it should at least make me with my camera and everything look a little bit nicer. So everyone who doesn't want to see me can now see me in 4K. All right, so we are getting back to our MCU franchise review. No live stream, I think, happened this week as we've both been pretty busy and just finding time to, we want to just relax a little bit. But the goal with the live streams is to go weekly, as much as possible, as schedules allow and as just kind of mental exhaustion or mental health allows. So that's why we just figured, well, we'll go ahead, we'll get a pre-record out for everyone, and we'll get back to our franchise review, and then get back to the live streams next week, just to give us a little bit of a break in between. And it's been a while. We left off with Iron Man 3, and it's been a bit.
Been a minute.
And did we? Yeah, we did do Iron Man 3 on our YouTube. I think it was the first of the MCU franchise review that we did on YouTube. If you have not heard our other episodes, you can go check back out on iTunes or all the other audio-only versions of the podcast. And all future ones obviously going to be on here, and we're going to archive them in a playlist. But if no one's been able to tell from my stammering and yammering here, Thor Dark World is a movie I like to think about the least when it comes to the MCU franchise. Not because inherently it's a bad movie. I think, in fact, what shocks me the most about this one is the fact that the writers on this wrote Infinity War and Endgame. And I sit there and I go, what the hell?
Yeah, I think that if you can separate yourself from the movie, like, and put yourself in like a writer's position, when you're thinking about the plot of the movie, and because when I rewatched it, when I was rewatching it, the first like part of it, I was thinking the whole thing with the convergence and like that Jane would find some sort of scientific, gravitational anomaly and get sucked into it and stumble upon the ether. All of that works for me. I'm like, that all seems like a plausible, we're writing this story that somehow is going to involve Thor. Everything kind of falls apart for me with mostly the Asgardian stuff and the Dark Elf thing. Yeah. Like, that's the weak spot of this story, I feel like. And I hate offering the criticism without like having a suggestion for how I think it should be better, because I feel like if you just stick with the Jane stumbled upon this thing, I don't know where you take it from there and still have the introduction of the ether, because at that point they're trying to connect, from Avengers and saying like all the Mind Stones, in Loki's scepter and stuff, and now here's the second one. For people at the time, could because of course now we've had Infinity War and Endgame, but at that time we're like, is that going to be like a stone? Like, what's, and they're planting the seeds for that. So I don't really know a suggestion for how to make the rest of it better. And of course, the bright shining star of this movie is Tom Hiddleston. He makes it completely worth it. Even some of the reactors that I've been watching, their reviews of it when they got to this point to Thor, pretty much most of them were like, so this is the second installment of Loki, because like Thor was basically the Loki story.
Right.
And then this is like Loki part 2.
Well, and it does do some further character development for Loki, in the sense of his relationship with Frigga, and understanding how impactful that is on him as a character. And this is as I joked in our live stream last week, this is the only MCU movie that takes its name, its title, too serious. Yeah, very literally. Because the most jarring thing, and I remember this specifically even when I went and saw it in the theaters, was the tonal shift, not just in the writing, but in the visuals.
Yeah, like in the saturation.
is muted. All the colors are muted. Even Loki's colors are muted. Asgard looks darker. London is filmed in a darker tone or darker light filter, and like the colors don't pop. The Bifrost doesn't look as fantastic, And then when you get to Svartalheim, it's just a desolate wasteland. Nothing. There's just, for some reason, they just were like, let's just remove all color, and I felt like, in hindsight, or even at the time, I felt like it was trying to be a response. I will say, like, Marvel got a little bit worried after Avengers, and DC was like, okay, now we're going to try to do our cinematic universe. And they came out with Man of Steel, and it was a little bit darker, especially for a Superman story. They were kind of going the Nolan route with a more serious and kind of darker tone. And I think the one thing that people miss when they go back and revisit Zack Snyder's Man of Steel, and even going on through Batman v Superman into Justice League, is that, like, and this was a criticism I saw of Batman, but one we liked about with the Batman, it wasn't Superman being Superman yet. It was the beginning of his journey and everything like that. So, you go and you look at that film, it's darker tones. Fans really liked it. Critics didn't like it as much. But I think Marvel got a little bit worried that fans moving forward after Avengers weren't going to want kind of the tongue-in-cheek humor, wanted a little bit darker storylines, and wanted to get a little bit more serious, which kind of do a little bit with Iron Man 3. Definitely try to do it with Thor, and it doesn't work. Works really well with Winter Soldier.
Yeah.
And so I think that was the miscalculation here. There was also the kind of director shakeup because Patty Jenkins was originally supposed to direct, and then she left due to creative differences. And then even Natalie Portman was threatening to leave, but Marvel was like, you got a contract, so can't quite do that. And so I think that a lot of that shift in style and story that they were telling in the first Thor movie got subverted a little bit to try to be like, oh, well, we want to win some of those fans that really liked Man of Steel rather than staying in the niche. Because once you get to Thor Ragnarok, they kind of go back to that kind of fun, silliness that.
Well, I think they also missed too that you can see Chris Hemsworth is a really funny comedic actor. Like he can really pull it off, and Thor is just fits that character better. It's like when you try to take Thor too seriously, it just doesn't really work for whatever reason. I mean, maybe somebody out there in Cyberland has found something that a serious Thor that works, but I've not come across like a serious Thor that actually works. It just kind of seems pretentious and kind of like it just doesn't really work for me, and especially not.
Well, like in the beginning of the film when they have him brooding, it just doesn't really fit.
No, it just doesn't really fit his character, and it doesn't fit what they were doing.
Right.
Like this really is Phase 2 really is like their awkward like 12, 13-year-old phase, and you're going through that weird phase before you get into high school, and like, you're not really a kid, you're not really old, and this is like their awkward pubescent, like trying to figure it out. And it's like, they kind of have two awkward-ish movies, and then they really hit it out of the park with Winter Soldier. So,
right. And then I would even go to say like even the new characters that they introduced throughout Phase 2, those films, like specifically, I think Guardians is part of that. They shine because they're new. Like we got to try to figure out how we're going to establish new characters such as this and see how they take going forward. I know one of the things that really kind of stuck oddly with me, and it continues to stick with me even going all the way through Endgame. Well, one, they talk about the stones kind of being created by individuals, right? Like that's part of the book, because like Malekith creates the ether, and stuff like that. And so like obviously they weren't at that time, like they didn't know Infinity War was going to be their. This sounds like a pun, but I don't tend to be a pun. But Infinity War intended to be their end game. And so, it was like that, okay, we want to introduce these concepts to the audience, so if they do start popping up here and there in other films, they have some exposure to them. I also don't like the ether being liquid and being a stone. Like, that's still because we never get that resolution in Infinity War on how it crystallizes, unless, like, after the events of this film, that's what its remains were. So like we don't get that.
One of that effect, like I don't really care, honestly. The confusing part I think would be like he created it, but then we get like to Infinity War or even Guardians of the Galaxy and the Collector is saying like 6, it's what did he call them? Singularities, yeah. I think that's, I don't know. I guess I just kind of headcanon that as it's either who shall not be named or whatever.
Right.
He Who Remains. There we go. Sorry, I just finished watching Harry Potter stuff. He Who Remains, like playing with things, or I feel like it kind of just I headcanon it as showing that Asgard isn't all that it thinks it is.
Right. Yeah.
They don't know what they think.
Easily chalk it up to just its legend, its stories that were passed down. Another thing that I don't really like about this film, there's 2 other major factors I want to hit on about what I don't like about this movie, is the inconsistent tone. So yes, they want to go dark, literally with Thor, but then it is constant humor and banter from the first film and from Avengers and from what we expect from a Marvel film. The two don't really gel well together. The one thing I can say, like, I think we talked about it in the Batman review, there were comedic moments, but it was the moments themselves. It wasn't characters necessarily overtly
trying to be funny.
acting.
Yeah.
And whereas in this, you know, like when you have the kiss scene and like they pop up and they're like, oh, Eric, Selvig, Bubba, and then Mew Mew, you know, it's like it just doesn't fit. Like, it's a cute scene, it's funny, but it doesn't fit with this overly dark tone you're trying to go for. And also getting the director of Game of Thrones, because you thought just because Game of Thrones was really good, he was going to do a really good Thor movie. He also did a really bad Terminator movie. So I would say, Alan Taylor, you might want to just stick to TV shows.
TV.
But yeah, there. The other thing being, let's see if the Dark Elves in of themselves, because at this time, this was right around the time that Disney acquired Lucasfilm, and we're getting the kind of gears moving on what they were going to do for Disney Star Wars. And this movie, to me, really felt they were trying. This was, we'll test some things to make it look like Star Wars. Because then you've got the flying Viking ships, they're shooting lasers, stuff that we, you know, weren't really given within the first film.
Yeah, we didn't see reference for in the first Thor, yeah.
And the Dark Elves, being this kind of very scientific race, is counterculture to what they are presented in the comics, because in the comics they're elves. They're like fantasy elves. And in this it's just like, oh no, they just want to bring darkness. Like, they really just, this is probably the most one-note villain with zero motivation.
Yeah.
Some character development that doesn't make any sense. And you get Christopher Eccleston in there, and you waste him. You waste him in the role. And, oh, well, Malekith has a part white face and a part dark face. Well, how about we make the dark face when he gets electrocuted by Thor's hammer? Ooh, there, we got it. We got it, guys. See what we did there? It's a lot of cheap. It's a big departure from the comics. And I guess what makes me even angrier is seeing how now, in 2022, they're really trying to embrace source material. They're really trying to actually adapt them as faithful as they can to the comics. And I get why they went the way they went back then, but I think it makes me further disappointed seeing the course correction they're making, giving Scarlet Witch her actual costume, and sticking to what we'll see with Moon Knight coming out, and Hawkeye being a great adaptation of his comic character. So it's like, it's not the I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed type of feeling with this film. I know part of the reason we had such a delay in getting this video out was like, I don't really want to watch it. And I can even say, like, Captain Marvel's probably my least favorite out of the entire MCU, story-wise and character-wise and all that stuff. But I'd rather watch Captain Marvel more than I want to watch Thor Dark World. It's just because I think it just left that bad taste back in the theaters when it came out.
One thing that they do continue to do well in this part of the Thor franchise is, with mixing kind of actual Norse mythology, is when Loki is in chains in front of Odin. If you notice, if you pause it or get a good screenshot, the little chains are little snakes, and they're biting into the tail. So, of course, that's part of the mythology where Loki was trapped with the snake that was dripping venom on his head and things like that. But they have little details like that I like because, of course, when you're putting yourself, I'm in the MCU, right? And you think, oh, this is kind of how Earthlings are interpreting these stories that this aliens, of course, we don't know they're aliens. We're talking like they're gods or whatever, and they're telling, oh, and blah, 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 and the snake, and it's dropping, and what it actually is like chains, but maybe they didn't understand that, and they took it as like, something. I just like those little things that kind of reference that, like, oh, this is how they kind of interpreted, and a primitive culture misunderstood and made it out to be this, and this is what it actually was, sort of a thing.
Well, and that's some of the things that I do like about this movie. There are little things in it. In fact, this is the first if you really pay attention, this is the first introduction of even the concept of a multiverse. And if you blink, you will miss it. If you're not looking for it, you'll miss it. Selvig in the, for lack of a better term, the loony bin, and he's giving his little
with
speech.
a Stan Lee cameo.
Yeah, with Stan Lee in there. Can I have my shoe, please? On the board, he's got all of his ramblings, and you have Marvel 616, referring to the actual comic universe, and kind of his little ramblings about what he has seen through the eyes of the Mind Stone and how that's impacted him and fractured his mind in this moment. We also get an introduction to the Nine Realms a little bit more. Very poorly, but it is kind of also interesting at the same time. Again, like, kind of, I don't want to beat this movie down with a stick, but like also the Warriors 3 kind of get the shaft again. Honestly, in all three, well, except for the first film, the Warriors 3 get the shaft for the rest of the franchise, especially in Ragnarok.
Yeah, they really do.
And in fact, this is the last time we see Sif outside of Loki, or if you want to include Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.,
Yeah, I think the fact that she did Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. at a time when the movie verse versus the TV verse was in a point of contention,
right,
that kind of sealed the deal for her being able to come back to the movie verse. They were like, yeah, no.
Right. So hopefully maybe we'll see her. I thought I heard that she's supposed to show up in Love and Thunder, but I can't confirm that right now. But yeah, ultimately this movie is just kind of a jumble. It's like they didn't really know what they wanted to do with it, or what they wanted it to be, or how they wanted it to continue Thor's story. The character development they do for Thor in this, I do like, in the sense of coming to terms between his relationship with Jane and his duty to Asgard, and getting to the climax of the film. And because all we saw in him in the first film was, I want to rule, I'll be the best king. And then realizing there's a little bit more to being a king. Then we get him to this film, and he goes, I actually want Jane more than I want a throne. I want to live more amongst humans rather than the thing I've sought all my life. So I really like that character development, because it shows kind of that growth from that arrogant, brash,
yeah, it was like at least shows that it gives him a little more than just, like you said, the idiot from the first movie, basically. Because yeah, if you listen to our review from the first movie, I was like, for me, that's basically it's not Thor, it's Loki.
Right.
Because I was like, I could not connect with Thor on any other level when I watched that movie, except that, hey, Chris Hemsworth is hot. Like that's literally it. Because his character's just a buffoon. He's an idiot, immature idiot. And there's nothing there for me. So when people are coming out of the theater and they're like, Thor, and he's so amazing, I'm like, is he though? Like, insert that in, is he though? So, like, here, at least he's, like, an actual person.
Right.
That has, at least a few onion layers, like...
Yeah. It actually, then, it does give him a little bit justice, although I would argue going forward past this film, they get really inconsistent with Thor's,
him.
Yeah, with his character development. So, there's really good moments. There's really bad moments. Like you, I agree. Tom Hiddleston is probably the shining moment. Even though I hate some of the humor in the film, I think one of the parts I always enjoy the most when I watch it is when they're taking the skiff through the like secret pathway,
secret tunnel,
and like Thor's like,
tunnel.
oh great, we're gonna die, and then pop through the other side, ta-da,
ta-da.
So there are those shining moments, and I like the if you betray him, I'll kill you, and then after getting the warning for like the third time, he's like, yeah, apparently there's going to be a line.
Yeah.
I also like that this film introduces kind of a more shared feeling with the other movies, even with silly cameos in the sense of Chris Evans as a Loki Captain America type thing. Like that was something didn't quite expect. It's kind of the first outside of Avengers where we've seen another big league character kind of show up for a bit, which I think kind of paved the way for Spider-Man Homecoming, for Tony to be a big part of that film and give us things like Civil War. So it was kind of really nice that that's what some of the stuff the film does really well. I think the performances are fine. I kind of really like the exchange between Jane and Loki. She smacks him and she's like, "That's for New York," and he's like, "I like her."
Yeah.
There are some shining moments. So don't let my overall negativity of what I don't like about this film, poor story, poor villain, and I think had it had an interesting villain, if they had a more complex Malekith.
Yeah, well, that's the part where I feel like it's so disjointed, because when you skip back and forth between we're all in Asgard and doing Asgardian realm things, and then we come back to Earth and we're doing, the gravitational force, like the science part of it, it just doesn't feel like it connects so much for me.
Right.
And that's where I feel like they had a good idea. It wasn't a crap idea to be like, oh, and Jane stumbles upon blah, blah, blah. Like all of that I feel like works. They just don't have the villain part to round it out, and I don't know. Like I said, I don't know the better solution to that. Should they have gone dark elves? Should they have tried to start to introduce, somebody working for Thanos trying to get the stone? Maybe they should have gone that route, and that could have connected to Guardians somehow. Like, I'm just not entirely sure what the better way to have done it would have been. But yeah, I mean, this was one of the movies when I first started doing my collection of the DVDs and Blu-rays and stuff. I was like, do I need this one? And then I thought, well, on the technicality of that it does have an Infinity Stone in it, I will purchase it and add it to the collection.
You're better than myself, as even if I think it's shit, I'll still buy it. Like Eternals, which isn't complete shit. It's just long, boring, and feels like it has no impact, and introducing far too many characters. But that'll be for when we get way down the road.
When we get down the line.
But yeah, I think I'm one who will hell, I'm still buying the Doctor Who's, even though that's been complete garbage. So I think it's always like, it's part of the completionist in me that's like, I may not be a completionist in video games, but when it comes to like films and franchises, I kind of need to have them all. Because like if I want to watch them in a series like we're currently doing, and if I don't have access to them, I might have access to all 20.
How are you going to finish it?
Yeah, 25 of the films of 26 films. Well, that one film will prevent me from being able to complete that. But yeah,
I was just pulling up the rest of Phase 2 just to see what we have left.
We should have next should be
Winter Soldier, and then Guardians, Age of Ultron, and then Ant-Man to finish out Phase 2. Right. So I don't feel like Phase 2 is a total loss.
Oh, absolutely not.
I feel like Iron Man 3 and of course this one that we're talking about, Dark World, were kind of like the awkward phase. They hit something really well, with Winter Soldier, and Guardians was really popular. Even amongst like normies who are not way into it, if you kind of like they've seen Marvel movies, a lot of them will be like, oh yeah, I really liked Guardians. And I think a lot of that does also have to do with the music in Guardians as well. And then we get maybe a little iffy on Age of Ultron, we'll see. And then we do Ant-Man. So it's kind of like Phase 2 is not terrible. You kind of just got to get over the hump.
Right. And that's kind of going
Dark
back.
World's a pretty big hump.
Oh, yes, it is. And that's kind of getting back to what I was saying. Like with when it's introducing the new characters like Guardians, which was one I remember being a little bit worried about, because it's like these are a lot of characters. I don't know them as well. I was reading kind of as Marvel tends to do, and even DC does this. When they're about to release a new movie, they will launch a new line to kind of get everyone up to speed, to give you the idea of who the characters are. But they did a really good job with Guardians, and I think a lot of that is James Gunn and his idea for what he wanted to do with Guardians, and Ant-Man kind of being the one where like people really wanted it. Edgar Wright was behind it. Edgar Wright was responsible for it. Then Edgar Wright left it, and Adam Payton took over. I believe that's the director's name. The one he ended up doing. he's done some Honey I Shrunk the Kid stuff, but he ended up doing a pretty good job with Ant-Man as well. So when it's introducing the new characters, I think Phase 2 really shines in those aspects. But where some of these characters, like, because if you look at Iron Man 3 is kind of the cap for the Iron Man films, not including Endgame and Infinity War, because that's in of its own self, its finale. But Thor and Cap are going into their second films, so they don't know exactly where they want to take their stories outside of knowing, okay, we want to do a political thriller with Cap. We got the Russos, yes, the guys who are responsible for Community, and you would never expect the guys who do Community to do fantastic Marvel films, but I think that's also part of their strength as well. And so you just don't really know what to do with these characters. Now you've got them. Now they're in the world. Avengers is over, for the time being until we get to Age of Ultron. How do we advance these character stories? Because it's almost like as much as we give credit to Feige for planning, it's almost like they didn't expect Avengers to work, like to be as successful as it was. So when you get there, you're like, oh shit, it did really well.
If we can keep going, yeah.
And then I think that's where you see that uptick in planning and interconnected storylines leading to the Disney Plus shows and stuff. Like, once Avengers really took off, Feige's like, I need to plan for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
So I think that's why you see that kind of inconsistency, and why we talk about Phase 2 being that awkward teenager phase, because it wasn't exactly like a plan to move forward. Avengers was the end game. That's all they kind of planned to do, and it's been an amazing franchise and run ever since. Much like if you go back to the original Iron Man, the Nick Fury thing was purely a Jon Favreau inside joke, right? Like, it was, hey, I want to throw this in there. I know we're not ever going to do anything with this, but I think the audience will love it. And
oh yes, we loved it.
That's right. It was like, oh shit, we didn't know this was what was going to happen. So we're like, okay, we got the easy timeline. We introduced Thor, we introduced Cap, we introduced a couple other side characters in these movies. We're good. And now, oh no, we got to continue. We can't just let this train stop this early on. So,
well, yeah, and especially Disney's not going to let that happen.
Especially now, right?
When you get into that planning room with Disney, and going like, we can do Avengers Campus in California, and we can have these TV series, and you're planning for this Disney Plus like down the road, like, because I'm sure they had Disney Plus like planned like years before it actually came to fruition. So when you're in the planning room of like, here's a steady stream of money thing that we can keep going, like, oh yeah, they were like, oh yeah, let's go until it's so saturated people just don't want these movies anymore.
And quite frankly, because I know there is some superhero fatigue out there, I think as long as you keep doing interesting movies like the Batman,
interesting character
stories, like the Batman, I think like what we're going to get with Moon Knight, what we've gotten for the most part for the Disney Plus shows. And as long as you're not, it's one thing we harp on here. It's like, as long as you're not trying to push any personal agendas, you're just trying to tell an interesting, good story, regardless on if they're superheroes or not. I think people are going to go to your movie. One of the things, not to keep harping on the Batman, but one of the things we both really liked about the Batman was the crime mystery aspect of it. It wasn't necessarily about Batman himself, but it was that central mystery to the story of the film that kept us glued to our seats. Unfortunately, with Thor Dark World, there's not much there to keep you glued to your seats. But
one of the biggest problems with like when you're a writer and plotting this out, and you're like trying to do, like we were talking about, development for Thor, you get to the part where he's like, yeah, we're gonna have Malekith pull the ether out of Jane, and then I'm gonna shock it and destroy it. Like, he's an idiot again. Like, bro, really, like, your dad, Odin doesn't know how to destroy it. You've got access to those fancy schmancy books, and they obviously hid it because they couldn't destroy it, and you think you're just gonna shock it with some lightning and ta-da?
Well,
like,
to be fair, Malekith thought that it was destroyed.
Well, it immediately like rose back up out of the ground. I mean, I don't know. It just kind of seems like one of those like, really, Thor, you thought that was the plan, like.
Well, I think that would have been an ideal moment to have Loki give him a little bit of a jab to be like, haha. But again, talking about some of the highlights of the movie, the betrayal scene is actually really well done, because I remember when seeing it in theaters, I believed he actually betrayed him.
Yeah,
Like,
I think every single reviewer I've seen who's never seen it before is like, what the,
Yeah.
he's betrayed him again, and I thought we just got to this point. And then when it turns around and he's actually helping, they all do like the Jim look at the camera, like what?
Yeah, it's the start of the kind of the turn for Loki's character in general. This is what we were talking about when we talked in our Loki franchise review, where a lot of people were criticizing for kind of the 3 steps back Loki took, and why he's acting kind of the way he's acting at the beginning of the Loki series. And this is what we're talking about with everything that happens post Avengers really helps Loki grow as a character. So when you see him in not Thor Ragnarok, but rather die in Infinity War, and he was kind of honorable at that point, that's because of the events of this film and the trust actually Thor put in him, also dealing with Frigga's death. But when we get to Loki, the show, you don't have that development. You have a character
who's directly from Avengers.
Right. You have that character at the base. Never had to pay for the crimes that he caused. Didn't have to deal with Frigga's death. So then when you has it all thrown in front of him by Mobius, that's when you start seeing kind of a different Loki then. And you see him kind of adjust quickly to this new dynamic he has. So that's if you go back and you listen to his reviews, and if you think we were crazy when we said it, this is what we're talking about. These are the shining moments, of course, in the pile of crap that is Thor Dark World. But overall, there's not much else I can say about the film. Visually, it's still good looking. The
cassettes, the costumes are all still beautiful.
Some of the CGI is a little iffy now, more with the cursed in general, because like they went way too hard to try to make him look like some big kind of crazy beast, and so I don't know. Demonic is the only term I can think of, when it was just like, yeah, you could have probably done it a little bit better with some practical effects. And like when he is looking practical, he looks fine, but when you have him in the CGI moments, he doesn't look as good. And then again, my mind kind of jumping to what we see now, and Thanos looking like you could reach out and touch him. He's actually standing there, type of thing. But also, it's before they amass this kind of big amount of wealth, because everyone is buying into the franchise. You do get great performances from Kat Dennings and Stellan Skarsgård again. Like they're fantastic. I do like the intern. Although he kind of really doesn't play much of a part in the film, and I'm still
he kind of disappears.
I'm still sitting there thinking, why would you throw the keys?
Yeah, like dumb.
Right. I mean, it works out, but like,
it's a plot device. It's a clear plot device.
Yeah, but like of all the things, like, because that's why I like Darcy's like thing of, give me your shoe. Give me your shoe.
Yeah.
I'm not going to use my shoe. I'm going to use your shoe. But I also, let's get on another side tangent here. What I love also about going back and seeing Darcy here versus knowing where I see her end up in WandaVision. I love that she went from an intern who had no background in science, didn't have any knowledge of it. She was a political science major, right? And to see her actually grow and develop and learn things from her time with Jane and Selvig to actually become a physicist later on down the road. I love that. I think that that's fantastic. You want to talk about strong female characters or interesting female characters, that's one of them. And I mean, and quite frankly, we went through a very long gap of time. We just never saw her again. So it makes, her resurgence in WandaVision and hopefully in the future that more exciting to see. She did go on her own journey. Like, they didn't just be like, yep, she flunked out of college or whatever, or she stopped following Jane around. No, she actually learned, and she became better for it. But yeah, this one, I know it's all over the place, but that's how this movie makes me feel. Like, because it in of itself is all over the place. It's inconsistent in tone, inconsistent in style, inconsistent with some characters. It just is that kind of awkward film that probably will not revisit for another few years unless I absolutely have to. I don't know if you have anything else you want to hit on about the film.
I just trying to go through it in my head, and I mean, I feel like that's all that there really is to this one. It's kind of like, if you want to be completist, you need to watch it, if you're going in order and things like that. But, I mean, it doesn't really do anything. Like, I feel like it barely does anything for Thor's character. Like, it just barely passes that mark. It does almost nothing for the MCU as a whole except for introducing the Ether. And for me, it's just a continuation of Tom's character study of Loki. That's really what the first two Thor movies are for me. They're Tom's character study in Loki, and that's pretty much the only reason I watch them.
I meant to hit on this earlier because you said an interesting thing, and I think that it would have made the post-credit scene that much more, I think, impactful. You were talking about how they could have done this better, what type of story that they could have done better, and maybe having someone come to Asgard for the Tesseract, and that
or for the Ether.
Well, or for the Ether, or for both, even, because when you get to that post-credit scene and you have Volstagg and Sif delivering the Ether to the Collector. And they go, we thought it was better to not have two Infinity Stones together on Asgard. So we'll leave our this one in the care of yourself, which of course, it's the Collector. He's going to probably try to come for the,
he wants them all.
For the other one. But like, what if you had made the Collector the actual villain and he orchestrated this, right? Like, he managed to get direct Jane to the portal where the Ether is and get involved.
What if even Jane's whole part of it was just an accident, and they were trying to pull a heist to get a Tesseract and find out, oh, hey, we can just nab her,
right,
and go that way somehow. Like,
right.
I just feel like somehow the villain part just is where it really is really weak. And it's not for lack of actors, it's just for lack of writing part.
Right. Well, and that's what I'm saying. Like, so if the big reveal is the Collector was the one who orchestrated it, he managed to get Jane to somehow find the Ether, and that knowing that would wake up Malekith and start a battle on Asgard with the intent of the Asgards will come to me because of my, whatever I do. I also think that would have actually helped his character in Guardians a little bit, because he is kind of wasted in Guardians to an extent. But like, that would have made it more interesting, right? That even our villain, our one-note villain in the film, was not the true mastermind behind the events. Like, I think that, because then that makes that kind of sinister scene of where he goes, one down and like, what, 5 to go. It's like, okay, what's your motivation? And then when we see him in Guardians, he's just like, nah, I just want to collect them. Like,
yeah,
I mean, I get that's his point, but
yeah, his line there seems a lot more threatening than he appears in Guardians.
Right. So, like, I think if you had reworked or restructured your story to have him be more malicious or malevolent, I think that would have at least maybe scored it up a little bit more in the points fields for me. But if we got nothing else to say, I think we'll just go ahead and kind of move into scores.
Look forward to Winter Soldier.
Oh yeah, Winter Soldier. God, that'll probably be like an hour and a half conversation, because it could go on and on about Winter Soldier. So for me, I think this one. God, this is gonna be harsh, but I think a 2.5 out of 5 honestly, there are some really enjoyable moments. The comedy's fine, but it just doesn't fit well with the tone they're trying for. I don't like the brightness of the first film, and all the colors and fantasy of the first film are all taken away in this one. It's so jarring to go from Thor to Thor Dark World with how the characters look, with how Asgard looks, with all of a sudden they're scientific and shooting lasers, pew pew pew, when they weren't really doing it before. And like you said, not really much Thor development. More again, much like our criticism a little bit of Thor 1 was, it's more of a Loki development film than it is Thor. And yeah, all I can say is I'm glad they got it right with Ragnarok.
Yeah.
So that's my
I'm debating. I don't know if I want to go to 2.5 or leave it at 3. I don't know, because I'm trying to think in my mind, is there one that I feel like is worse?
Yes.
Do I want to rate lower, than this one?
Yes. At least I know I do.
I want to go 2.75 because I don't really feel like it deserves a 3.
Screwing the system up a little bit, but okay, I'll allow it.
I don't feel like it needs to go to a half. Like, I don't know. Because of all the parts that I do like about it.
Right.
It's like there's plenty there that I still do enjoy. So it's not a total waste, because I feel like if I want to go down to like a 2 or a 1, it's got to be real bad.
Okay.
Like, and this is like, I'd still watch it. I still like watching Tom. Like, it's okay. It's not that bad yet for me. So
I'll allow it this time.
Whatever. Like, you're in charge of the scores.
That's right. I'm in charge. I dictate your scores. This is not what I sent you via email. This is not what I told you to score this film. I control it all. It's all
like
me.
I would obey.
Right. All right, folks. Well, I think that's going to do it for this installment of our MCU franchise review. So we'll look forward to getting the next one in. As always, like, share, subscribe, to our YouTube or to the audio only versions of the podcast if you don't want to see our faces. You can find them on iTunes, Podbean, SoundCloud. We also have Patreon, and thankfully, since the Netflix shows have moved over to Disney Plus, for sure, we can continue on with our Daredevil review over on our Patreon exclusive stuff.
Yeah, we gotta record like a few of those or something.
We gotta.
Just like,
there's gonna be a day where we're just gonna have to spend all day doing it. And then we can just drip release them because Vimeo. I've got the basic Vimeo plan. Yeah, as always, if you want to write into the podcast, you can write into us at criticsnotcynics@gmail.com, or even better, just leave us a comment on our YouTube, and we'll talk about what your thoughts are. What did you think of Thor Dark World? Did you actually like it? Are we wrong? I mean, hey, I like to hear other people's thoughts. I never want to, never consider someone else's thoughts on the film. Maybe you thought it was a better character study of Thor. Maybe you thought Malekith was a more developed villain. Tell us how, and we'll talk about it, because I like talking about movies. So, all right, folks. Well, we will talk to you next time.